Welcome to episode 6 of A Pint with Seaniebee. We've managed to get to this point in the podcast life existence, which is a major achievement, all thanks to you. Thank you very much to all of you who've sent me likes and messages of support and encouragement. We're going to keep with it until everyone loses interest, and I would ask that regular listeners, if you could continue to like the podcast wherever you see it. It's available in SoundCloud, Stitcher and iTunes. If you can review it in iTunes, it'll be great. If you can pass it on to your friends, tweet about it. These things are slow builds, and I'm hoping that over time it starts getting larger and larger listeners. But we shall see. Anyway, today's episode comes to you from New York. We've also got some other news, which is that we have a sponsor in New York for all episodes of A Pint with Seaniebee recorded in the city. The sponsor is Houndstooth Gastropub, which is great food and is on 37th and 8th Avenue, and its sister pub across the road called Stitch, which is a bit more nighty and sort of music-y. They're both run by my friend Nick Cohen. Nick has said that any of you who go into the bar, find him, mention my name, will get a free pint, even if I'm not there to enjoy it with you. Today's guest is very special to me, a mentor of mine, the guy who took me out of Ireland in 1996 all the way over to Singapore, where he was in charge of probably the best agency I've ever had the pleasure of working for, and one of the best in the world at the time, BateyAds. His name is Robert Gibralter. He currently is a senior director at one of those old stalwart bastion agencies of New York called Devito Verdi. And I caught up with Robert to share his great wisdom, humility, kindness, and he's just truly one of the great guys of the ad business and a wonderful person. So, without further ado, I give you Robert Gibralter. Good afternoon, Robert.
Thank you very much, Seaniebee. It's an honor to share some moments with you.
Thank you. I guess the time we worked together was fun in Singapore. You were the chief executive officer of BateyAds, which at the time was probably the best agency in Singapore and one of the best in Asia. Mm-hmm. You were one of the great bosses, I think, because of the way you knew everyone's name, and you had an arm around his shoulder because we had a rather volatile boss in Ian Beatty. I hope you're listening, Ian. And how did you get out there, and what was it like when you left America to go out to Asia? What was that like?
I got to Asia through Europe. I had been senior vice president, regional account director, managing at the time the launch of M&M's in Europe. And my job was to go over there and help Mars take the sweets they had on their shelves for, decades, called treats and minstrels.
Yeah, I remember that.
And take them off the shelves,
yeah,
and replace at least that volume and more with these color-coded candies called M&M's. The Germans didn't want greens in their pack, and the Dutch wanted to emphasize milk, and the English didn't care what anyone else thought, and Mars wanted one campaign in Europe, and we had clients and agencies in every market giving their own opinion as to what had to be done. So it's a good lesson for me in resourcefulness and diplomacy, because
so this was DMB&B, was it?
And this was Bates.
Bates, okay. But was it successful?
I was usually successful because it was very important for Mars at the time to build a global brand around M&M's, because they were investing over $40 million in the Olympic rings.
Right.
And
still are.
Then they wanted to leverage that investment in promotions and advertising worldwide.
Yeah.
So, but that takes me to, I was projected out to Asia.
Yeah.
And so I went to Bates in Singapore, where we were losing $1 million. We had 36 clients, but there was a phenomenal creative director there at the time, Paul Quinlivan, and he just put together a phenomenal creative product on everything we worked on. We went from 28th to 8th in the marketplace.
Right.
I think it was Media Magazine's Asian Agency of the Year.
Well done.
It was very heady, and this was done in 2 years. On the back of the success of the Singapore office, oddly enough, my compensation was tied to success, and we were very successful, so they were looking and going, this guy's pretty expensive. Maybe we should leverage him in a bigger market. So I I was offered to run the Malaysian office, which was much bigger.
Yeah.
And I went, but this is my baby. I'm really attached to Singapore. If I can continue to run Singapore and Malaysia together, which a lot of other people had done, I'd be really happy to expand my horizons and grow. But I'm very loyal to my the staff here and what we've accomplished in a short amount of time. But at the time, there was a transition in regional director from Alex Hamill to Chris Jakes.
Right.
And Chris said, okay, that's fine, Robert, you can. And then behind my back, he hired my replacement in Singapore.
Nice.
And I went, bye. My contract says you'll take me back to New York and pay me for 6 months.
Yeah.
And so I was about to go back to New York when Jim Aitchison told Ian Beatty, let's get this guy to run the Singapore office.
Yeah.
So
this was about 94?
This was 94.
Right. For those who don't know, BateyAds was at the time probably one of the biggest agencies in Asia. Ian was like a kind of a David Ogilvy-esque kind of character who set up the business in the early 70s on the back of Singapore Airlines and created the Singapore Girl and created that brand and made it what it is today. And an absolute genius to work with, and very abrasive character, difficult and rude sometimes.
Well, it was also, he was a control freak.
Yeah.
And that aspect of it was important to him, that he had people who, like sheep, would, other than me, of course, that he would...
he surrounded himself with yes men, yeah.
But again, it was we tripled billings in 94 to 97. We doubled our profits in the Singapore headquarters. Singapore was honoring its most enterprising companies. We were the only ad agency in that list. We won more awards than anyone in Asia by far. Yeah. We were 30% bigger than Ogilvy in the market. 175 people. Yeah. We had a media agency. We had a promotion agency. We built
public
a
relations
design agency, and we had a pool table.
When I was living in Denver, Ian has a house up in Boulder, and he kindly brought me to his house for a barbecue and catch up. And he's still all there, but I did learn more in 2 years with you and Ian and all those guys than I did in 8 years working in Dublin before. I haven't felt since that kind of vibrancy that you were in an ad agency that mattered, that wasn't just constantly looking over its shoulder about what the client wants, and wasn't afraid and wasn't run by accountants, and it was one that was very pure in its mission, to the point of reshooting commercials if they were wrong, or leaning in hard and saying it's not good enough, do it again, and that goes all the way back to Charlie Saatchi throwing ads at his brother when he came home selling crab, and it's gone. It's absolutely gone. It was
passion at the time, and it came from the creative talent.
So it's amazing. One of the things I felt as well about you there was, you're a soft, hard words, softly spoken kind of guy, and there was always that tension between Ian and certain people like myself, where you wouldn't see eye to eye, and he'd be very domineering, and you were always there kind of picking up the pieces and packing people on the back and saying, go for a beer, don't worry about it, he's just like that, he can be rude. And of course Ian's not a stupid man, he knew he was hiring you for that reason, but it was very clear how well you managed quite a lot of egos.
Well, I think that's what the challenge and joy that I discovered over the years was the human resource challenge of working with very bright, creative people. And the more creative, the more challenging it was. I came to realize that the whole challenge of managing and working and nurturing creative talent is like coaching a team. Or inspiring an orchestra. On any given day, the unexpected will happen. The string will break or the ankle will break, but you still got to go out there and win the game. And then creative people can be as competitive as Olympic athletes, and as determined to win as Roger Federer, and as focused on what they do, and that energy should be given dignity and taken seriously. It was good to leverage.
So
that.
we can't leave Beatty without that. I think I'll say it if you're not going to, but I thought it was really terrible the way it ended for you there. And actually, when you talk about dignity and respect, I thought that was just sadly lacking in what happened, because it was around Christmas, probably 95, I think, was it?
No, it was 97,
97.
and
Sorry, 97.
and I had gone to the home. It's very humbling when you're invited to the home of someone in Asia, and I was invited to the home of Seng, who was the original founder of Beatty.
He was a production guy
and ran the production department.
Great guy.
And he had just come out of the hospital and had a bypass surgery, so I went to visit him at his home and paid my respects and wish him the best health, and then I rushed back to the agency for a meeting, only to find Rick Scott Blackhall in my office.
He was the number 2 in Beatty.
And he
with
said,
a furrowed look on his face.
And he said, look, I'm afraid it's over. Your job is over. I don't know exactly what words he said. I was kind of like stunned, because I thought we had been riding pretty high, and then I learned that Ian had hired someone from Saatchi in China, and we'll let history speak for itself.
My jaundiced view of the business kind of started there. I think I could probably pinpoint it back to that time, because I'm a great hater of how little respect is given to employees in advertising, and how little loyalty is valued, and how the big names here get on my back about going, you don't understand business, it's business, blah, blah, blah. But one of the things about the ad business is you have to have, and I think we had at that time, you had so many great people working for you in harmony.
Mm-hmm.
And, you end up having to protect, keep, massage egos, make sure they're paid properly, or else they leave. And right now, and for the last 5 to 10 years, the people who are leaving the ad business, in my view, are the people who can leave the ad business, and the people who are not leaving the ad business are the people who are unable to leave the ad business. And what you're ending up with is a stagnating ad business, and a lot of other things happening elsewhere.
Well, we talked about the benefits of Ian and his genius and what he built and all of those positives, and there's the countervailing negative. You look at the great agencies, the amazing leaders, and they tend to be dictators, and they tend to be control freaks, and they tend to deliver the great product because they're so hard to work with, or they're so demanding. You go off and say, well, can't the world be more a meritocracy, a pluralistic society where people are honored with what work they contribute? And I don't know, I think Ian would rather, and this was said often, that the company fail with him than succeed without him.
So it kind of did,
And so, it's my party, and I'll cry if I want to. And I think that that's not just true of just advertising. I think it's very, very hard to build something, sustain it, and to be appreciated for it, because I think people who come after assume so much. Like, this is the starting point. When I came, and look at what I did, and they have no concept of how hard it is to start, how hard it is to get momentum, how hard it is to build a reputation like that. And you're just coming in and going, well, he doesn't understand the right answer to this. And,
well, I mean, I'm not, as they say in Australia, not pissing in your pocket, which apparently is a good thing. I would actually chart the decline of BateyAds to that moment, because I know for a fact that a lot of people who were there at the time with you, when it happened, we were stunned, shocked, disgusted, pissed off. A lot of people left within the next 6 months.
I thought it was because of how I played soccer.
Well, no, you're not. You're crap at soccer. You're very good at squash, but not so good at soccer. We're very passionate.
We had a good soccer team.
We did have a good soccer team. From then on, I mean, I was probably there for another 6, maybe 8 months. I'm not sure. It just, it's like that one player who leaves a club, and the club just, loses its shit.
I'm sorry. I feel bad. I mean, I would have loved to have continued to ride, When I left, I did nothing but thank Ian for the opportunity, because it was quite an honor that he gave me the opportunity to run Singapore's crowning agency. I mean, I don't know that there ever was an agency as good or ever will be.
Yeah, and you'll never get it.
Like
you'll never get a direct thing from Ian, really, as you know. But I mean, when I was up visiting him last year, I think he conceded that it might have been not such a great move getting rid of you, if that's all too little, too late. But anyway, you got back to America, and you were suddenly a client.
Well, no, it was, the move abroad is so different. Your sensory perceptions, everything is open and everything's so delicious, and wow, the world is so big, and it's all challenging, and where am I going to find diapers and all of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But the move home is the most shocking of them all.
Really? Tell me why.
Talk to anyone who's worked abroad and has repatriated and looks around and goes, where's the parade? Don't you know what I've been doing lately? And you basically find out that family and friends go, well, we accommodated you those days you came back when you were abroad. But, we've had a life too.
Yeah.
And, la-di-da, you've had a good one, but now you live here. And I think that that's true in careers as well, that, European and Asian companies that send people abroad to work tend to integrate those experiences far better into much more of a global mindset. Whereas if you go abroad for a U.S. company and come back, you find somebody else has been pissing on your fire hydrant, or there's no real seat for you at the table, and you have to take steps back and reestablish networks. And because the prime market is the U.S., not the world.
I have to say the opposite is the effect in places like Australia and Ireland. I mean, my countries where you go away and you succeed away, they welcome you back with more salary and open arms and experience and all that. But there's a certain cliquiness and a certain arrogance to New York that I don't think it deserves in advertising anymore. Maybe one day it did, one time it did in the 50s and 60s.
Well, even in New York it's worse, because this is very much of what have you done lately business, and what have you done in New York. And you could win awards in the Midwest, and people go, oh, really? I actually came back without anything specific, and after a period of time, I had to get a job. My son was now 12, 13. Private schools in New York are very expensive, and so I took a job at Gray Advertising in account management on cigarette business. It was back in the saddle of advertising, but I did ask my son, I said, do you mind if I work on cigarettes? I said, it'll help you go to a private school. It was really what was available to me, because the industry wasn't growing like it was when I went abroad. The talent in account management was changing because planning was splitting off from account management.
Yes.
So I took a job at Gray.
It was almost like client service was driven into
it was setting up meetings, carrying the bag, and making
saying yes.
And saying yes. But it didn't last very long, because from the time I got my job till my next big opportunity that came along, it was about 6 months of interviewing to get a big job, interesting job at Avon Products. Initially, they hired me and they said, would you please take care of global advertising for us? We really need to get our act together internationally. So, but the week before I actually started, the outgoing president hired a domestic agency called NW Air to coordinate with an international agency, Darcy McManus and Macy's and Benton and Bowles, to be my agency.
Right.
And I went, oh, okay. Well, let's give it a go. I mean, let's give it a go. Let me meet with the people. And so we started having these global meetings where 40 people would come to New York to go ahead and give us the big idea. Yeah. And we got absolutely nothing done. It was nothing but like the United Nations trying to solve the Middle East.
It was back to M&Ms in Europe.
It was so horrible. It was so horrible. And meanwhile, The meter was running at $1 million a month in fees.
Really? I'd love to know what number that is today, because it won't be that.
And so after 10 months and $10 million in a huge, horrible meeting, I had prepared, and I had went to some friends and got a freelance team to put together a presentation, and just took it into Andrew Jung at the time, chairwoman of Avon, and just said, hey, I have to show you this. We presented it and said, where has this been? I said, will you please let us do this? I put together a blend of people who had worked there in marketing, as well as a few people from around the world. And we became 11 people in New York, coordinating with... Internally. I ended up becoming an inside agent.
Did you get rid of the building $1 a month?
Yeah, that was over.
Right.
That breaking up is hard to do. I think I ruffled a few feathers there, but on the back of that, and on the back of a very, very successful global launch, my responsibilities increased to be in charge of the creative agency. And then I got very involved in the jungle, and the jungle was managing over 700 million brochures a year worldwide, and the efficiencies and the creative product. And when I started, there were probably about 30 freelancers, and I go, why are there all these freelancers? Because the systems were so broken that the people who were working there would basically leave at 5 and say, hey, give it to a freelancer. and the interesting thing about being on the client side is you realize that it's a lot more conservative in terms of managing people. At an agency, you just kind of like hire and fire at will. Yeah. On the client side, people sue you.
Was there more politics in the client side than there was in agency side, or?
It is politics everywhere. You have people. Every time you ask a question like, "What do you think of this?" to someone, you get politics.
And then you moved into the online world when the online boom happened. Tell us about that.
Well, it was an interesting opportunity. My son went to Harvard. I'm very proud to say. And he was the first Facebook baby at Harvard. A year ahead of him was Mark Zuckerberg. Yeah. So my son got on Facebook. I got on Facebook with him. Oh, how creepy, Dad. He graduated in 2007, and he and a very, very impressive roommate, Mark Lithuanian, decided that polling has been locked in the industrial era of create a survey, distribute the survey, interpret the survey. And you could do it in a mall, you could do it by phone, you could do it on the internet, but nevertheless that basic methodology of construct a survey, implement, interpret is a godlike one-way street, and they were dedicated to in creating multiple perspectives in terms of who knows what the right question is, and who knows what question is more important. And well, I bought into it hook, line, and sinker. I thought this is the most exciting thing I've ever been involved in, and so I went to work for them. I opened my Rolodex and made them bacon and eggs in the morning, or turkey bacon for one of the people who worked there. We didn't eat pork, and we worked out of our dining room in our apartment as opposed to a garage, and they launched Urtak, Urtak, and it grew to 40 million opinions, to tens of thousands of polls created around the world, and it became one of the first tranches at Techstars in New York. When Techstars was started, the Urtak was a Techstar baby. We raised funds, but couldn't get any traction with the investors in terms of the orientation, which was towards publishing, as opposed to research. There's no accountability for failure in polling. There absolutely isn't. I remember when I was we were looking to build business in Asia, and someone came up to me and said, look, you can get a lot of stories by just making predictions. As a managing director, predict something for next year. And if it doesn't happen, no one will ever care. Yeah. No one will ever know. And I think that is true of polling. So the methodology was quite simple. it was all yes, no, don't care. And so any two questions then could be cross-tabulated if you care about this. I mean, it was just an amazing methodology.
What do you, looking back, what do you feel are the pearls of wisdom? What are the things that you would say, my learnings in my career, that you would pass on to the next generation or to the younger Robert? What would you say to yourself or someone like you?
Here's something I can offer by virtue of my age. When you go into a profession, you tend to be quite myopic. You go, I, me, I, like a teenager, and you want to compete, you want to get ahead, and maybe you don't look around enough and ask a few questions like, what happens when you're 35? If I hadn't been so focused and driven and eager to grow in my career, I might have taken a little bit more time to interview people who are older than me in their jobs and say, well, what do you do when you're not here? So I would pass that on, which is at some point in your career, you're going to go through transition. You can call it retirement, or you could call it a second career, or you could call it anything. But you should be prepared for it, at least emotionally. You could start preparing it by pick something you love to do, paint, fish, start a little business on the side. Andy, in your interview with him, became a painter and was able to help provide food for his family.
So tax bill,
pay the tax authorities. I think that's a big one I reflect on now. What other things can I say? I don't know. I think when you internationally, you might share this as well, that if you aspire to work abroad, I think you have to be incredibly flexible, because when you want to move, you can't move, and when they want to move you, you have to be ready to move. It's much harder to manage an international career, but yet it has its amazing benefits.
Robert, you've always been an inspiration to me anyway, and you continue to be, and it's always great coming to New York to see you and catching up, and we tell old war stories together. Thank you very much for being on the podcast and for sharing all of your career knowledge with us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be on your podcast. I appreciate the opportunity to learn about myself again.
Thanks, Woody.